So the question was, hey, I've been feeling crappy and want to get back on track. I think everybody's felt that before.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on a 72-hour fast or some sort of detox? My body weight has been pretty steady and with what I'm currently doing, but I was thinking about following some sort of carnivore or caveman type diet to maintain or even lose a few pounds. All right. So this is I believe a guy.
Yes.
And what age?
He's about my age.
Okay. So
early 30s.
All right.
Has kids, has a demanding job, very, I think, relatable to a chunk of our audience.
Yeah.
So, yes, don't have his full medical history, anything like that. I consider this person a friend, but, again, these conversations do come up frequently. And so I think it's a good one to unpack.
So he wants to know about the diet and how does this relate to Herman Pontzer?
How does this relate to Herman Pontzer?
Yeah.
I wanted to use his question about the paleo diet specifically to talk about what at least some of the details of what an actual Paleolithic diet looks like.
Okay. So he said the caveman diet, meaning the paleo diet, paleo style. What is that general? My understanding, maybe we'll start there. My understanding is paleo diet is ostensibly things a caveman would have eaten. So you're talking about fresh fruits and vegetables and meat, nothing processed, anything that ostensibly could be cooked over a fire. Is that about the summation?
Yeah. On their website, because I had to kind of jump back a little bit too. On their website, they say, hey, it's actually pretty simple. Before people started organized farming and manufacturing foods, humans ate what was available to them in nature. And since we humans have spent a whole lot more time eating what we found than what we farmed or made, our bodies naturally prefer less processed, less industrialized foods. So that is sort of what I found interesting. Everyone assumes that they know. They look at fruits and vegetables and bananas and, leafy greens and just assume that's what we were eating 10,000 years ago, 1 million years ago.
Right.
And my understanding based upon some of different papers from Herman Pontzer was that that's just simply not the case. Sure, they were not eating processed foods, obviously.
Right.
But their blueberries are different than our berries. Their starches are different than our starches. The nutritional makeup of some large game that they hunted down is much different than the large game, so to speak, that's even farm raised in this day and age.
Yeah.
And so those kind of things again, this isn't to bash the paleo diet either.
Close this because I just want to listen. Yes.
It's not that I want to bash the paleo diet, because I think any sort of pattern that nudges us towards less processed foods, I think is a good one.
Yep.
And so I think I just want to mention that at the outset. I think they're doing a noble thing and just nudging people towards that. But at the same time, we can't truly eat what our ancestors ate. It's just not feasible. And even trying to standardize or try to make a summation of what, people ate 100,000 years ago varies differently based upon there's temporal changes. What was their climate like? Where were they at a given time? So many different factors. Maybe they lived in colder temperatures and they had much less access to vegetables. So obviously they weren't eating tons of plants and leaves and such.
Right.
And they did just fine. And then on the flip side, you have somebody who maybe lived more towards the equator or maybe an African tribe or something more akin to current day hunter-gatherers. Well, they have more of a mix of certain things. And then depending on the time of year, they're eating more meat, less meat. They eat things called tubers, which is essentially their fibrous vegetable. It's just really impossible to distill all of that down to the paleo diet.
So to some extent, there's no possible way to replicate the Paleolithic diet. Even if we were to simplify it down and just say, forget about regional variation, forget about climate change or whatever over the course of 100,000 years, we're talking about a generalized Paleolithic style, because of all of the changes in the world, that's just not a thing.
Exactly.
Okay. But what about the premise? I mean, you said eating less processed food is a good thing.
Yes, definitely.
So what's wrong with, okay, it's got a bad name, but what should we be doing? What's the benefit? What's the point? Why is this interesting?
So good question. Nobody, I think in 2025 is at least that I could find, is like bashing the paleo diet at this point anymore. I think this was more of like an early 2010s sort of movement, kind of akin to the CrossFit come up. I think, maybe I'm speaking to something again that's not the most current, but again, I just see it in a different sense. I mean, with this person I talked to, they mentioned it, maybe not even fully aware of what they meant by it. They just, again, they almost just referenced it in terms of like, hey, I know I need to get away from processed foods. And so again, that's a really, what's the point? I think that's the point. I think diets like this have nudged us towards at least the thought process of trying to avoid what's most available to us.
Yeah, we're figuring out that the standard American diet just is not a good idea.
Right. And so if you look at earlier hominins, or they'll call it, or even living apes, their diet is dictated by what's most available to them.
Sure.
And most of those populations, and even if we fast forward to current day hunter-gatherers, they are way less likely to have all of the different, the maladies that we're accustomed to: heart disease, diabetes, cancer, age-related sarcopenia. They're way, way less prone to those things. In essence, what I see is us doing the same sort of thing. We are just consuming what is most available to us, and we are not evolved enough to handle or process the unprocessed foods, so to speak. So we're just, things sped up way too fast.
We have eclipsed our physiological capacity to keep up.
Right.
That we have intellectually created a world that our bodies are not suited for.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Yep. Things sped up way too fast. We became way too advanced. Technologies advanced with the way we prepare foods, and simply hunting and the emergence of fire and all of those sorts of things made such a massive difference. Things just, that was like the fork in the road, that once we got that down, we hit the ground running as a species.
Absolutely.
So, and
I don't want to go back, just to be clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it's very tempting to just generally look back on, I mean, again, as if we know exactly what our ancestors were doing or what the earliest living apes were doing. It's just, we just reduce things. We try to reduce things down into very understandable, ways to process the past. So,
right. So there's a lot of speculation. We don't know anything for sure. What's really getting you fired up about this?
Good question. What I find interesting, again, is just the apples to oranges comparison of just the food types of the past, So for example, in the paleo diet, they recommend against the consumption of grains. So you should be getting most of your carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables. You don't need to be eating rice or potatoes. And that's a whole other conversation. I find any sort of restriction like that to be sometimes counterproductive for people. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, depending on the location, depending on the specific tribe, depending on the specific group of hunter-gatherers, there are multiple instances where grains were a high percentage of a given dietary pattern.
Right.
There were certain groups that were based, I think I heard, based on grindstones that they were finding, that they were, using it, they were processing it.
They were processing grains.
They were to bake different things, to make different, almost like flour, essentially. So it's just doesn't make any sense knowing that then when looking at a paleo diet, you immediately, or like the current paleo diet,
right,
that you create these restrictive parameters. Although that's one sliver, it's just that right there troubles me a little bit.
Okay.
Now, if they want to make the argument that, hey, domesticated rice nowadays, so rice now versus rice back then is different. Now the way that we process rice is so if you compare it to wild rice, the energy content in what we have is much higher.
Sure.
The fiber is much lower than what's in what's, so to speak, when you're talking about wild rice.
Higher calories, lower fiber.
Yes. And what does that sound like?
That sounds like the standard American diet.
Right. So we've become really good through our different farming practices and different processing techniques to make things more energy dense.
Yeah.
And that's very similar to how when hunting for food for survival, that you're trying to find something that is sort of the most bang for your buck.
Yep.
It's if these different groups of people have to get by for a long time on tubers and leaves and stems, they will.
Right.
They create they've often, I know I say I could be more specific, but you'll hear that they'll create backstock of those sort of things in the event that the small game has sort of dried up or the large game has dried up. So it's, if anything, the paleo diet to me is just massive amounts of flexibility.
Yeah.
That's the paleo diet.
Interesting.
So if you find yourself at home and, you have oats and rice and you're trying to follow this diet and you're like, well, shoot, what am I supposed to do? I would say just go for the rice, go for the oats. It's okay. The grains are going to be okay in that instance. And, be adaptable enough to choose that versus, it's always like, what's the alternative? So I chose that versus the processed cereal, or I chose that versus the mac and cheese. That's our current environment.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's the element of what's the most affordable, what's your living situation. So I want to be sensitive to those things.
Sure.
Processed foods have created cheaper alternatives, and there's no denying that.
Yeah.
Are they the best quality across the board? Obviously not.
Right.
But when you're trying to, think about the food deserts and the, lack of access that certain people have, it's an important, part of the conversation. So if you're somebody who has the means, you have the time, you have the resources, it is, if you want to be like your ancestors, be flexible like they were, learn to navigate on your toes when you're at a restaurant ordering this versus that. Or, if you haven't had tons of, junk this week, if you are out with your family, be adaptable enough to know, hey, it's okay to bump up my intake on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
Like that to me is my idealistic sense of at least this point in time, the only way we can kind of navigate the current situation, because our situation is never going to be like the hunter-gatherers. And so it's very hard to...
We don't have to hunt
hopefully not.
or gather. Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, that's one of the big differences is I have yet to stalk an elk,
right,
or a mammoth, and I have never picked a berry off a tree and eat. Well, that's not true. Okay. I have rarely picked berries off of a tree and eaten them. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we will be able to mimic that. And the other thing is the localized reality of food availability 100 years ago, let alone 10,000 years ago. I don't want to go back to a time when having an orange meant that you had to be in a tropical climate. I like being able to get oranges in Pittsburgh at any time of year. I think that's pretty fantastic. I like raspberries quite a bit, and they don't always grow in all the places. Or let me go the other direction. I live in Nashville, and in Nashville, they don't believe in rhubarb. Now, to all my Yankee friends and people in England, I'm sorry. But they don't believe in rhubarb. But I can get rhubarb in Nashville because of all of the modern agriculture and farming practices and the restaurant. I want that. I don't want to give that up. So the idea of having some flexibility is actually pretty cool. Pretty sticks with what I feel is normal.
Definitely.
I don't know.
definitely.
That's the end of my sermon today.
No, I think that's good stuff. I know I mentioned the the rice as an example.
Yeah.
But if, it's so common to hear people say, well, I'm buying grass-fed, farm-raised beef, whatever.
Yeah.
Like I
Free
go
range beef.
Yes, all those sorts of things, which I'm not debating that that's fine. That's a fine choice. Sure, go for it. All things being equal, if you look at the meat of, the nutrient content of wild game that's caught versus even farm raised, grass fed sort of things, there's going to be way less saturated fat. There's way less fat within the muscle of a given cut of meat versus what we're farming and, kind of doing on our own.
Yep.
And so if you say, I'm going to do the paleo diet and eat more meat because that's what I heard that this one specific subset of my ancestors were doing, that makes sense. I'm just going to up the meat content.
Right.
What if what you're choosing is a form of meat that you assume is going to be really healthy? You're eating a ton of it and it's really high in saturated fat. It's really high in this or that. It just creates what does it do to people? It's kind of leads them astray. Mm-hmm. It's not really, and maybe I'm too hung up on that, but I just don't like that. I'd rather just be told like, hey, what we did 100,000 years ago and what modern day hunter gatherers are doing is nothing like what we're faced with now. So just leave that in the past. What you can garner from that style of living is that, sure, it's really good to get tons and tons and tons of physical activity and get tons and tons and tons of unprocessed food. And be able to adapt on the fly. That's the name of the game. Not like no grains because of this one set of hominins that they, in their specific climate, they only ate this and they only ate that. That is so ridiculous and is historically false.
So is that the advice you gave your friend?
No. That was for this was for the sake of discussion.
You said keto or bust.
Right. Yeah. The advice that I gave him, even just thinking back to his question, at first we ended up talking about the whole fasting thing.
Yeah.
More than anything. I just wanted to understand where his head was at with that sort of intervention. But with a lot of people, they're disenchanted with how they're feeling. Maybe they had a, weekend or a couple weekends in a row of birthday parties and they didn't grocery shop and they're just, that feeling.
Oh yeah.
And so I get
I felt it 2 days ago.
Yeah. And so I get the reaction of, well, let me just cut my intake down completely and let me detoxify and let me fast. And you jump to these, things you see on social media, or you just jump to the extreme to try to make up for lost time or make up for something that you did. And while I am certainly not void of those feelings as well, I just think trying to help somebody, that's just not the long-term play. I think that in practice, when you do have a kind of an all-out weekend of eating and excess calories and such, I think that there's no reason to cut back the next day. Or if you're not super hungry breakfast the next day or super hungry for lunch the next day, I don't think it's the end of the world to just kind of like, not,
you mean
force your
artificially cut back.
Yes.
Like top down intensely, meaning I think you were just going to say it, that if you instinctively feel like you're just not as hungry, just let it ride.
Yeah, just because you eat, eggs and toast every morning, if you're not feeling it, and that's kind of like maybe a good cue to listen to. You're loaded up on calories from the day prior. That, I guess, the only reason I say that is as far as I'm willing to go in terms of like making up for lost time, compensatory eating, fasting. Like that is nowhere near fasting.
Right.
That is as far as I'm willing to go with people because anecdotally, I think that's what happens to me. And it's always this ebb and flow.
Sure.
Back to Herman Pontzer, that you're burning a consistent amount of calories and it's hard to get out of that constrained window.
Yep.
And you also know that once you sort of are at a set point of body weight, you are hardwired to maintain that over the long term.
Yep.
So not over the next week, but over the next several months, there are going to be days and weeks where you're really hungry and really full and so just lean into that. And just because you're not super hungry after a weekend of a ton of eating, just don't eat as much. You don't need to go on a 72-hour fast, for goodness sake. I just don't. I'm willing to be proven wrong for sure, but I just think that creates nothing but then a rebound effect on the flip side. So what do you do? So it's like, what do you do after the 72 hours of barely eating or not eating or only drinking blended up carrots, for goodness sake? What's the flip side of that? And how do you transition back into the real world?
Because you're talking to a friend who said he was happy where he was at with his body weight.
Sure.
But what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, the notion that you can easily shift your body weight is not accurate. It is difficult, and physiologically your body is going to fight against you by making you more hungry, by making you move less, all of those things. It takes a supraphysiological action to change the natural physiology.
100%. Yep.
Why are you even here? I could just do this show.
I mean, that's just how, I want to reference studies and I want to talk about those sorts of things in greater detail, but you just see that's the way that it plays out for most people. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
They don't maybe necessarily realize what's going on under the hood when those ebbs and flows occur, but it's very much a reality. And so in his case, 72-hour fast. What do you think? What about a detox? I want to get back on track. Well, hey, let's hold off on that. And then, what were you thinking about this whole paleo thing? Were you thinking like you bought pizza too many times last week and you wanted to go grocery shopping? You wanted to talk about maybe some things that would be better to buy, that are cheaper, easier to prepare if you're not a, culinary expert. Those are the really, I think, practical things that, him and I ultimately discussed. But, again, for the sake of discussion, Herman Pontzer, Adaptable, the Paleolithic era, those things are way more fun to talk about.
Well, and they're also the underlying structure that eventually leads to the rather short and pithy answer of, here's how you do it.
Yeah. So, again, I was encouraged to hear if you're in the same boat and you're thinking, maybe I do need to make a dietary change and I need to at least temporarily align myself with something that's more of a fad. I think, hey, if that gets the wheels churning and you go to the Paleo website and you start to read what they're about, that's fine. Again, they're encouraging eating a diet of ultimately less processed foods.
And that's something we agree on.
We definitely agree. But again, I think it's easier said than done to do that. Yeah.
So it sounds like, once again, what you're saying is paleo diet, lovely, not really a realistic representation of Paleolithic man, or woman, but a good idea and concept and a noble goal. We should all move that direction. Even if we're not as hardcore as they might like. And you said what is the name of the book you're reading?
So reading Adaptable, but the specific article that I referenced some stuff was from more of the Burn era. And so the article, we'll link it, is Effects of Evolution, Ecology, and Economy on Human Diet, Insights from Hunter-Gatherers and Other Small-Scale Societies. And if I could summarize it quickly, it is, again, paleo diets or ancestral type diets, caveman diet, whatever you want to call it, is all fine and dandy. Again, nudges you towards a minimally processed diet, which is great. Way easier said than done. Way oversimplifies the way in which we get there. But there is no shortage of examples in here of how this is wildly different than any singular ancestral paleo caveman type diet. Don't listen to what anybody says about their specific ancestral diet. Just read this, and there's enough in here to understand that.
Fair enough. Awesome. I love that. That was great. And I look forward to hearing more about Adaptable by Dr. Herman Pontzer.